Hello and welcome to a new episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. My name is Mehmet, and as you know, in each episode, I cover multiple topics ranging from emerging technology, cybersecurity, and also I touch base on topics related to startups and entrepreneurship. But today, I wanted to focus on an area. It will be related to technology, it's related to startups, but I don't think we have covered before. And it's a very important topic around burnout. And this is why I have with me today, joining me, thankfully for him, it's early morning from Toronto, Michael Levitt. Michael, thank you very much for joining me today on this episode. If you can just introduce yourself, a little bit more of background about you, and then we can take it from there.
Thank you so much. Really looking forward to our conversation today. So, I am Michael Levitt. I'm the founder and chief burnout officer of the Breakfast Leadership Organization. And what we do is we work with teams and individuals on burnout recovery. I wish it was burnout prevention. I do talk about that. But typically, when people or teams reach out to me, it's as they've already had their experiences with burnout and they want to get over it. So, it's been an organization that I've been running for several years now, and the pandemic definitely amplified a lot of challenges. And again, I know this is something that happens a lot with IT and definitely startup organizations.
That's great. I would say to be covering this topic, Michael, today. Now, to get started, right? And because you've been working for long time in this, given your also like personal experience with burnout,
Mm.
what are the early signs that a tech professional or a startup founder should be aware that okay, I'm getting a burnout? What are the early signs?
Yeah, the early signs that I see time and time again with individuals is first, how have you been sleeping? Is your sleep been lousy over the last few days or weeks or potentially months? Hopefully not years. But if you normally can sleep okay and for some reason you start having bad nights of sleep, that's a big warning sign because if you don't get sleep, then we don't repair the damage that we do to ourselves on a daily basis. When we sleep, our body is actually in repair mode, or in IT speak, that's when all the patches are getting installed or the security updates. And if you're not sleeping, for some reason there's a bunch of users, for example, and your brain is, processing a lot of different things and you're not resting, then you can't deploy those patches. You can't install the upgrades, you can't recover from what happened today. And then what happens is that starts piling up. So if you haven't been sleeping well in a while, that stress that normally gets dealt with while you sleep and repair, it
Yeah.
just starts piling up. So today's stress gets piled onto tomorrow's stress, the next day, and the next week, and the next month. And prolonged stress is what turns into burnout. You don't go from zero to burnout. It's not that instant. Prolonged stress, as the World Health Organization defined it, is what burnout is. It's prolonged stress. And you're overwhelmed. You're unable to meet the demands of life. You're fatigued. You're mentally and physically drained, and just life is bad. Another sign, of course, is are you making more mistakes at work, or
Hmm.
is your head in a cloud? Are and a lot of that ties in, of course, to sleep as well. But what we see a lot is when people are under prolonged stress, their cognitive abilities are directly impacted. So they're not able to see patterns, or if you're looking for errors in code, for example, you're not going to be able to see it clearly because you're fatigued. You're not able to process information as you normally would be able to. So that's another sign of it.
Like lack
Uh,
of focus, Michael. Like
lack of focus, inability to comprehend what people are saying to you. You could have a conversation, and for some reason, you're not comprehending what they're saying to you. So that's definitely a big issue. Another sign that we see a lot, coupled with fatigue, is your eating habits. Are you not
hmm
eating normally? Are you eating, quick food type of thing or fast food and not taking the time to actually sit down and eat? Are you literally driving to the restaurant, getting carry out and eating it in your car going back to work? Now, if you're not taking a break to digest your food properly, that's going to cause some impact as well. And of course, food is energy. So if you're
hmm
not getting the right foods for you, then that's going to impact your ability to sleep as well as the energy you have. And then another sign I see a lot is, and it ties into the fatigue and being worn out, is you're more irritated by things. Little things that normally wouldn't bug you start
Mhm.
bugging you and you get mad. So if that client doesn't sign that deal, or you're ordering things for your startup and they're not being delivered on time, or they ship the wrong things, you start swearing or throwing things around or get really upset when it's really not a huge deal typically. But when you're burned out, little
Mhm.
things become big things.
That's a great start because we get to know now about the signs or the early signs. Now, again, because and I actually your title is also catchy, to be honest with you, Michael, Chief Burnout Officer. I'm sure like you deal with a lot of people who face this burnout. Usually, what are some of the specific factors that lead to burnout specifically in our tech industry?
I think in the tech industry, as we know, we talked about this in the pre-show a little bit. It's one of those industries that promotes the 99.9% uptime. Well, everybody
Mhm.
goes, "Oh, that's great. That's you're always up." Yeah, but that takes effort. That takes a lot of time and preparation with cybersecurity and patches and upgrades and changes to code, especially if you're using an outside platform. Let's say you're using something from Microsoft and they roll out some type of update that they really weren't clear about. Usually doesn't happen, but it has in the past. And all of a sudden that breaks half of your system. So you're scrambling, trying to figure out how do we get this back up and running. Your customers are upset because they can't access whatever they use through your system. So you're stressed. And again, if you're fatigued, you're not going to be able to see the errors as quickly because you're just frantic and you're trying to stop the pain type of thing. So eh, the problem with all of that is, yeah, again, going back to what we said before, if you're not taking care of yourself from a physical standpoint and a mental standpoint, that's setting you up for stressful situations and not being able to navigate through them a lot. Another thing that we see a lot, and again, this is a huge challenge in every sector, but definitely with startups and IT for sure,
Mhm.
is you need to have boundaries around when you work and when you don't. And I know in a startup, many times you're changing from a job that you work a certain number of hours a day is a startup where, especially if it's just you or maybe a couple people, excuse me, couple people, you are working a ton of hours. And because you're trying to get the business built up, you're trying to be successful, you want this thing to be successful. So you put in all this time and effort. But the problem is all that time you're putting in, after a certain number of hours during the day, your productivity drops dramatically. Doesn't matter how gifted or skilled you are, you're not going to be as productive if you're working on hour 14 than you were if you were working on hour 5. So you have to understand that things take time. And I know in many cases with people that are entrepreneurs, they need this to be successful right away, and unfortunately, as we see with the stats, a lot of businesses fail because it takes time to build out a business. It takes time to get everything set up. So
Mhm.
it's one of those things where when I hear people say, "Well, I wanna launch my own business," I do give them a strong recommendation. Don't leave your job and go all in on this yet. You need to get the foundation, get everything set up, figure out who your customers are, how to reach them, how to market, all the things that are encompassed in running an organization. You want to get that set up. Does it stretch it out? Does it take longer for the business to grow? Yeah, but you're also not in this desperate situation where you need to have it generate money. Because if it doesn't, then you've got the financial stress, which, in my personal opinion, I think is the worst stress there is. And the reason why I say that is when you are struggling with money and it's impacting your ability to pay bills, I don't think anybody, thoroughly loves paying bills, but
Mhm.
we do love the ability that we can. And when we can't pay our bills, that's an ego hit. We take it personal. We feel like we've let somebody down. And it just has this domino effect on all the other things. So Having boundaries around when you work and when you don't is critical, and making sure, again, going back to the signs, make sure you're eating the right foods for you, make sure you're getting a proper amount of rest. And I didn't mention this before, make sure you're getting some activity in too. I'm not going to tell you to go to the gym and become, somebody that exercises,
Yeah,
3 hours a day kind of thing. If you want to do that and your health provider says it's okay, go for it. That's fine. But get in some physical activity, even if it's just to walk around the block. If you're, in a wheelchair or can't walk, there are other, exercises that you can do. If you're completely, immobile and you can't move your body at all, exercise your mind. Stimulate it, learn things, do all of that. There's things you can do to nourish yourself so that way you're healthier. If you're healthier, you'll be more productive, you'll get more done in less time.
that's great insight, Michael. And you talked about boundaries, right? So, is there a way that we can actually test these boundaries or find these boundaries before we embark on a journey, whether, as you said, maybe changing job or maybe starting a business? Is there a way that we can plan this time ahead so we don't end up with having burnout?
Oh, definitely. You have to get really crystal clear on how you spend your time. And most people, other than if you work in a industry that you have to track your time, like my original career was in accounting, billable hours. So we had to track, the time that we worked on client files and whatnot. So that was important. That was necessary. So we did that. And lawyers would be the same. Other industries, not so much. Especially in IT, you might say, "Okay, we're tracking it," but you're not tracking it down to every 15 minutes or so. So you have to get really crystal clear on how you spend your time, not just work time, but personal time. Because what happens is when you actually track how you spend your time and you use some type of a tracking system or code, your meetings versus tasks versus other things that you do, you get a better understanding of how you actually spend your time. And what you'll find in most cases is there are some inefficiencies in how you spend your time. You're not grouping like tasks together. And what that means is you might be using both sides of your brain on certain activities, which like, well, that's not a big deal. It's good to use my,
Mhm.
my whole brain. But if you can batch like minded tasks together, you flow easier, because if you're using your left side of your brain on things, if you group the projects or tasks or adventures that you do that is using that side of your brain more, you group those things together, shifting between the things is easier. If you're zigzagging back and forth between using your brain on things, it's going to take a little time, not a lot, but it's still straining. So, when you have a better understanding of how you spend your time and the work that you have to do as an entrepreneur, then you get a better idea of what needs to be done. So, for me, one of the things that I do is every day of my work week has a theme. Now, this has been developed for me over time, but one of the things I do is every week I know what I'm gonna be doing on Mondays. Mondays is usually my outreach for looking for speaking engagements because 'cause I'm a keynote speaker. So I look for speaking engagements, follow up with people and whatnot. Tuesdays are for intro calls or follow-up calls or meetings or whatnot. Wednesdays tend to be, because I have my podcast show as well,
Mhm.
tends to be the day that I schedule my podcast interviews. Thursdays and Fridays, I don't schedule anything in advance. And the reason why I have those days open is if something comes up earlier in the week that I need to have a follow up on, or something gets canceled, or we need to shift it, or it takes longer than I thought it would, I've got Thursday and Friday to play with. Or, if I'm going to be on a show, for example, then, I usually will look at a Thursday or a Friday or maybe a Tuesday, sometimes Wednesday, depending on how booked my day is.
Mhm.
But I have themes like what is today? Okay, today is and we're recording this on a Wednesday. So I know what I typically do on a Wednesday. I don't have to look at my calendar. I do, of course, but I know what date is. So even before I look at my calendar, I kind of have already in mind what I'm going to be working on today. And by doing that and planning ahead of that, it makes it easier and you get a lot more done. If you just say, well, what am I going to work on today? I'm not sure.
Mm.
Well, you know what? It's going to be in the afternoon and you're still not going to be sure. If you schedule your things. Make sure you schedule breaks. Do not skip those. Just because you're working for yourself doesn't mean you skip breaks. You know, if you're working for a company, you have breaks. You should do the same thing for your company. I know you want to get this business up and running. I know you want to build it and make millions. We all do. I get it. But if you break, then by the time you are successful, if you happen to get there, you're gonna be too wiped out to enjoy it, and that's not worth it. It's simply not worth it. So pace yourself. This is a marathon. You don't go crazy running, like full blast, because you're not gonna hit the 26:2 mark. If you do that, you have to just pace yourself, understand how you are. There are gonna be days which you're gonna have a little bit more discipline, or excuse me, momentum than others. Discipline is a key thing to factor in. You have to be disciplined because there's going to be days you're not going to be motivated to do the things you want to do. But if you have the discipline, then you'll still fight through it because that's what makes up entrepreneurs is the discipline.
Yeah, great. And this reminded me also because I think there is a book, I forget the author name, but like about also like sometimes we need to slow down to go fast. And,
Hmm.
like you need to allow yourself that sometimes you need some rest. Like it's
Hmm.
okay not to, I mean, squeeze yourself into the schedule. And I honestly, Michael, I learned this also the hard way because I was thinking that the more I do meetings, the more I do calls, the more I sit in front of my laptop or whatever, I would be more productive. And then I figured out, no, like it's okay some days, as you explained, just not take it off, but I mean, make it for something else, right? So this is really, I would say, useful advice from you. Now, again, from your experience, and because we are touching also on the tech and startups, of course, burnout has a huge impact on the health and well-being. But how do you see its impact on innovation, on leadership, on be productive? Like, what are some of the things you can tell us about?
Yeah, it's very important for organizations and employees to recognize that burnout is literally robbing society of better products and services. Because if your team is fatigued and burned out, they're not creating the best work. They're not being the most productive. They're basically just doing bare minimum. We've heard over the last few months and year or so the thing called quiet quitting, where people were
Yes.
just basically doing the bare minimum to do their job. And I am one that bothers me a lot because and I understand why people do it because they feel overwhelmed and they feel that they're not being heard by management saying, "Look, you're putting too much work on me." So they say, "Okay, I'm going to force your hand and I'm just going to do what my job description says I'm going to do. That's all I'm going to do. I'm going to punch in at 9 a.m. I'm going to punch out at 5. I'm going to take my breaks. I'm going to take my lunch. I'm not gonna bring my phone. I'm just literally go robotic, and that creates a culture of not wanting to give and grow. And again, I understand why people do it, but what happens when people, do that kind of thing and they quiet quit? Let's say they finally give up and they say, I'm gonna go work somewhere else. So if they've been quote unquote quiet quitting for several months, now they go into a new job. They have not been giving their all for a while. All of a sudden, they're in the new job. Much like a new relationship where you're dating somebody, you're trying to put your best foot forward because you want that other person to like you. And maybe, the relationship will, prolong or get longer or, maybe marriage or whatever. Same thing with the work environment. When you're in a new startup or a new company, you want to demonstrate, yeah, they made a great decision to hire me, but if you haven't been working hard and all of a sudden you have to work hard, it's kinda like you used to be a runner, then you quit running and now you're not in shape, and then you say, "Okay, we got a marathon coming up in 3 weeks," and you haven't ran in a year. That's not gonna look pretty. You might hurt yourself because you're not used to it. So, yeah, burnout impacts productivity. So if you're an organization, figure out what's happening with your teams. yes, I understand, in many situations with the economic challenges that we're seeing around the globe, that you may not be able to bring on as many people. So people are right now, in many cases, especially in IT, and this has been the case ever since the Great Recession in the U.S. back in 2008, and even going back to the dot-com era,
Hmm.
where when the dot-com bubble burst, a lot of organizations cut their IT staff dramatically, and they never brought those people back. So what happened is the people that survived, congratulations, now you're doubled up on your work or maybe triple depending on the situation. And they said, well, when things turn around, we'll bring people back. Well, they figured out, hey, we can get more work out of this one individual. Why do we need to hire two? And we've
Yeah.
seen that. And I have a family member that happened to. And it was atrocious what that organization did, and they had the financial wherewithal to bring on additional staff for the IT department, but they chose not to, and he ended up leaving and, finding another role, and, it was the best thing for him, but it left a mark, to say the least, and it was unfortunate to see that, but unfortunately, we see that a lot of organizations where people just they overwhelm their employees, they give them too much work, they don't keep track of it. And in defense of management, 'cause, I see this a lot. What happens is managers will delegate work to their great employees. It's like they're great, they get a lot done. But the problem is managers tend to be not as good about keeping track how much they delegate, so they overwhelm their
Mm.
all-star employees, and they're not giving the opportunity for those other employees that maybe aren't as good to grow and gain. So what happens is you end up overwhelming your all-star employee. They try to tell you that, you don't hear it, or you're not approachable, or who knows what the situation may be, and then all of a sudden your all-star leaves. Now what? Like, "Oh, no, we lost a key employee." Yeah, what did you do as a company to make that happen? Because they're not just gonna leave for the heck of it. Was it
Right.
money? What, or was it workload? In many cases, it's usually workload. Yes, money is a factor, but I see a lot of people staying at companies and keep making a little bit less because their workload is right. Can make a contribution and they're doing great work. So, gotta focus on the workload. You gotta focus on how much you're delegating. Figure out as a company, you know, who are you? What is your company trying to do? If you're trying to do everything, you're going to fail. You need to really narrow down what you offer, get really, really good at that. Doesn't mean you can't do those other things, but you have to really get fine tuned on what you offer because if you're trying to do everything, that's overwhelming your customers and confusing them. It's overwhelming your employees because they're working on unrelated things that don't add up correctly to a successful product or service. So there's a lot of things that get involved in this but it boils down to just understanding, who your team is, what the workloads are, and managing them accordingly.
Mhm. You touched on multiple things, and actually, it was one of the questions I want to ask you. How important, Michael, to keep a culture that can avoid this to happen in the first place? And the reason I'm asking this, and again, you touched base on that. I understand that because I work also for startups in my career, and I understand, yeah, it's a fast-paced environment. There is a, a rush, I would say, to do things, whether they are technical, sometimes they are maybe sales related. How important becomes the culture? And, maybe here where the founders and, I would say the executives have to establish this culture to avoid this burnout.
Yeah, it's really important to have this culture established and a way to do it. There's many approaches on it, but the ones that I find successful, and yes, we know that in IT and in startups, there are a lot of times long hours. There's a lot of things going on. But the owners, the founders of the organization better have a crystal clear roadmap of what their plans are for the organization. They say, okay, we want to have $2 million in revenue, starting next year, and you're at 1 million now. And so you want to double your revenue. How are you going to do that? what has to happen in order for that to happen. If they don't have it written down, clearly mapped with guidelines, plans, projects, and all that stuff, you're not gonna hit it unless you're fortunate and you happen to secure a client that is gonna pay you, to get you to that level. You have to have a strong, solid plan of what you want your business to look like over the next year, 2 years, 5 years. Yes, I know. 5 years ago, we had no idea what we were gonna be enduring over these last 3 years. That was not on anyone's roadmap. No one had global pandemic on it. No one
Right.
had remote work. No one had supply chain issues. No one had wars. No one all the things that we are facing, that was not on anybody's playbook. If they did, they should have gone to Vegas and bet on it. They would have made a lot of money. But no one had that. So, you have to understand that with plans, there has to be some flexibility and off ramps saying, okay, we're not going to be able to roll that initiative out because there's been a change. Okay, there's this, or okay, now, there's a big push where, in IT and programming, the utilization of AI, chat GPT, and all the other things. There's so many platforms out there now that are making things easier to deploy. I know there's a big concern about replacing people, but I tell people, you know what? They said that everything that we've ever invented, it was going to eliminate jobs and all that stuff. But you know what? There's jobs that get created all the time. So don't worry about that. Just get up to speed on what is going on in the tech world. Keep on top of that. But again, it just boils down to you have to understand, in order to build a culture, one, you have to walk the walk. So if the leaders are working, if your team's working long hours and you're a founder, you should be working those long hours too. If you're not, then that's gonna create a culture that's go, "Sure, they're
Mm,
punching out." They were here a half an hour and now they're off going golfing or having lunches and all that stuff, and I'm back here in this factory working long hours or, deploying all these codes to all of, our clients to get everything upgraded and all that, and where are they? You know, the organizations that I worked for, and I used to work in IT as well, the ones that did really well when we were doing, late night hours or things like that. Let's say data center deployments where we're deploying servers at a data center. My boss
yeah.
was there. He didn't need to be. We had it covered, but he was there. He was there
Yeah.
helping out. Why? 2 reasons. 1, he wanted to make sure that we had everything we need. Number 2, I'm sure he was making sure we weren't screwing around and just, not working, which we wouldn't because we wanted to get home. But also it helped him keep up to date as to what we were facing because he saw some things like, you know what? Next time we're going to order these instead of this, or we're going to switch to this server size because even though the performance is a little bit less, we can deploy more and we can do some things with it because we had it in the budget to be able to do that. That would have never happened if he didn't go on site when we were deploying these data centers. And the conversations and the weekly meetings, they don't have to be micromanaging meetings, and he certainly wasn't, but we kept him up to date as to what was going on, and he was very supportive. Probably one of the best bosses I've ever had. And that was 2 decades ago, but I
Mhm.
constantly think of him, and I borrow a lot of his leadership practices and styles in how I lead and how I've led organizations in my career. So it left a mark on me because I was paying attention to it, and there was no burnout in that organization, and it was a startup. It was a startup, and we were growing dramatically, but it was a startup. But I wasn't burned out. Were there long hours? Of course. Was there travel? Yes. But I had a blast. Why? Because I was allowed to do the work that I needed to do. I was given all the tools necessary to be successful in that job. And the ownership were present. They weren't, some, venture capitalists off in Never Land. No, the owners were there. They were seeing it. They were watching things. They were helping out. They were contributing. So it made such a huge difference in keeping that culture. And of course, it continued to grow, and then it turned into a publicly traded company. That would not have happened if the work that was done in the early days was done differently.
I have to agree with you 100% here, Michael, because again, from leadership perspective, I think there are two types of leaders. There are the types who, as you mentioned, the guy would be with you on the ground, whether he's there to supervise you or, but he gives or she gives you the feeling that I am with you in this,
Mhm.
which is great. And you have the other type of leaders, and I'll put it between quotes, who lead, I would say, manage behind a screen and behind spreadsheets, and they just give orders, and they think that, yeah, that let them figure out that by themselves. And I've seen people get burned out because of this. So you touch base on a very, very important point over here. Now, Michael, when I was preparing for this, I get to know that like you are a certified NLP and CBT therapist, right? And like, can you explain how do you use these, I would say, techniques in and strategies with you know, and this might give some ideas to fellow people in tech and in startups.
Yeah, for me, I obtained those certificates after I started doing the work that I was doing with burnout coaching and giving guidance and keynotes. And the reason why I obtained them, and I used to work in healthcare, so I was a director or a CEO for multiple site healthcare clinics. And yeah, I worked with our clinicians, and we had mental health clinicians as well, and therapists and whatnot. And I always had like a slight interest. And my minor, it wasn't officially declared, but I had a minor in college in psychology, so because I wanted to have an understanding around how people think, and so it's always been a part of a curiosity that I've had. But what I was coming up against again and again when I was working with people on burnout prevention, and recovery, is you can stop your burnout quicker than you think if you implement some things, take better care of yourself, set boundaries around how you spend your time, eat better, get your rest, be able to communicate with your team and have a manageable workload. You can stop burnout. But the deeper work is figuring out why you burned out in the first place. And yes, it might be the overwhelming amount of work, but there's other components involved. There's thoughts, beliefs, habits. Why is it important for you to launch this startup? Why is it important for you to work at this startup? What's important to you? Why do you want to do this? And you start going down a series of questions to get people to think and reflect on why they made the choices that they made. A lot of times it's from past habits, behaviors, maybe some things that they were taught when they were younger, some experiences they had previously at work and previous organizations. There's a lot of components to it. So, what I was finding again and again when I was working with teams and with people is there was these things going on internally, their beliefs and the language that they use on themselves and the thoughts that they have that was contributing to their burnout because there'd be people on their team, similar demographics, age, all of the level of the job, all of that stuff. And those people weren't burning out at all. But you had their colleague next to them that was as burned out as you could get. You're like, okay, what's the difference here? And a lot of it is just your habits, your thoughts, your beliefs, the patterns, your activities, how you conduct life were contributing factors to this burnout. So I thought, okay, let's dig in a little bit more. And I found that cognitive behavioral therapy and NLP therapy uh, were very helpful in me in getting people to kind of look within to figure out, okay, what am I doing in this? Because it's easy for us, and I see it all the time. Employers are burning me out. I'm burned out at work and all this stuff. And we're pointing fingers and blaming the company. But there's a common denominator, and that's you. You're responsible for your burnout, not your boss, not your company. You. You're responsible. That doesn't mean you're to blame, but it's your responsibility to deal with it. I know we say, well, I want my boss to change it. You have to do some work too. And that's what's hard because looking within is scary. Because if there's past traumas or past life experiences that are very uncomfortable for you, it's not an easy thing to go back and look. That's why with the therapy side of things, it's like, okay, we'll have safe zones here, and we can say, okay, this is a safe space. You can share what you feel comfortable. If this is something that's too much, we'll call time out. We'll stop and reflect accordingly. But what I found is by doing that and implementing some therapy techniques in the work that I do without being, actual therapy session, I was
Mhm.
finding that people were getting deeper to the causes of why they burned out in the first place. And that's when they can do some work there to be able to make sure that they never burn out again. Because I burned out once in my life, and I swear I will never do that again because it was horrible what transpired. But I recovered from it. I live a better life now, very happy, and I don't want anybody to go through it. So the idea is get through it, figure out, how to get yourself back to your version of normal, and then do the work to figure out why did you burn out in the first place so you can make some adjustments so you never burn out again.
That's a very good, I would say, insight, Michael. Before we come to the end, just, and actually I should have asked you this question before, but is there any certain type of personality that they are most likely to get burned out than others, or is it something that everyone could face it?
Everybody can burn out, but I tend to see people that are very driven, type A personalities, people that want to prove something. They have a personal mission. They want to be viewed as the best technician or excuse me, the best small business owner or best entrepreneur, or they're driven to want to be the best. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with that. Uh, we want people to thrive. We want people to grow and push because it makes humanity better when people are creating new things and services that benefit humanity. That is a good thing, but you don't want to do it to your own detriment. And unfortunately, when you're so driven and you're putting in all those long hours because you want to make an impact and all of that, but you're not taking care of yourself, that's a big problem. A real case in point, for some people uh, on this, listening to the show right now, may be familiar with the late Jim Rohn. He's a, leadership guru, made, a ton of money, speaker, all that kind of stuff. And I was during my morning walk, I was listening to, a session that he had did, many, many years ago. But, if he was still alive, he could have given it today and it would be very applicable. He was talking about, somebody that he knew that owned racehorses, and the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness and all those races in the US are going on, in May and all that good stuff. And this individual that he knew had 9 horses, thoroughbred horses, and he had it scientifically broken down, the exact amount of food, the ingredients, the types. These horses were taken care of as best as they possibly could be, living the best lifestyle, eating the right food, getting the right amount of exercise, and all of that stuff. But the owner himself was so out of weight, was not taking care of himself, was not eating properly, he wasn't taking care of himself. He had the best horses in the world, but himself was not taking care of himself at all, and we see that too often. We're like, "We gotta take care of all." We see it with parents. Gotta make sure our kids have the best, so we do that, but you're not taking care of you. You gotta take care of you have to take care of you first, and sometimes people say, "Well, that's selfish." You're darn right it is. You have to take care of you first. Who else is gonna do it? There's
Right.
only you there's only one person that you'll ever spend the most amount of time with in your life, and that's you. No one else. You. You're always with you. You gotta take care of it. Give yourself the best chance to be successful in life and figure out what that means to you, because everybody's definition of success is different. But you have to take care of yourself, both mentally and physically, because if you do that well, then the other things you'll do well as well.
I have to agree with you. And again, I was, thinking before that, yeah, like, why I should care about myself, like, you know, myself will be okay. But then I figured out, like, yeah, there's nothing wrong actually to take care of yourself, because if you don't take care of yourself, you cannot take care of your family. people around you, and maybe your staff later on if you are a founder. So that's really a good insight, Michael. Now, before we come to an end, anything like you want to share from your experience, any final, I would say, recommendations for people working in tech in general?
Yeah, just one, make sure that you get plenty of rest. I know there's going to be some long days, but make sure you focus on your rest. Find the foods that are right for you. I'm not telling you not eating fast food, but figure out what foods give you the natural energy you need so you don't have to load up on caffeine so you have the big spikes and all that. Figure out what foods give you the energy. That'll go a long way for your health, your mental health, your digestive health and all of that. And make sure even when you're working those long hours that you still do things in life you like doing outside of work. Even if you're only doing it for a little bit, or maybe you used to go out, a couple times a week with your friends. Okay, maybe go out once a week or once every couple weeks. Continue that because when people are working too many hours or they're overwhelmed and burned out, they start cutting out those things in life that they enjoy doing. And that's the worst thing you can do. Make sure you still have things in life you enjoy doing and do those as often as you can because when you do that, then it harmonizes your life a little bit better and it helps you get through those busy times and you end up being healthier and you enjoy your work more.
I have to agree again, Michael, because from personal experience, the best thing I found is also um, like if you find a book that makes you feel better, read a book, continue reading the book, and
Mm.
exactly what you mentioned, like don't punish yourself because at some stage I did this mistake like a couple of years back. Oh no, if I go now with friends, like I will be like missing out from my work, like I feel like I'm lazy, but 100% right. I think it was a very informative, I would say, episode today with you, Michael. It's something that I wish everyone would follow, the advice that you gave, because we are living in a very fast paced in environment and everything seems overwhelming, but I think we can simplify this. And one more thing I want to add to what you mentioned, Michael, about the AI and ChatGPT. I think we should see it as a positive thing because it would take from us a lot of things that we feel overwhelmed by, but actually it can be done by a machine. So we should be more than happy to have ChatGPT helping us.
Great.
Thank you very much, Michael. Any final thing you want to say before we
No,
close?
I really appreciate your time today. And for people who are interested in learning more, there's a couple websites. I'll give you
Yes,
a relatively new one. It's called freefromburnout.com. So free, FREE, from burnout.com. There's links to videos, links to some resources and blog articles and things like that that is specific to help individuals with burnout. If you're an organization and you are interested in learning more about bringing me in or my team to help your team with burnout prevention, just go to breakfastleadership.com and down at the bottom, there's a contact, or up at the top, I think there's a contact link. And you can just enter a little bit of information and we'll be right back to you and be more than happy to help because I want to eradicate burnout. I want organizations to be healthy because healthy organizations and healthy people make the best products and services, which the globe benefits from. So, help me defeat burnout. So thank you so much for your time today.
100% I agree with you. What I would make sure also is to share the links that Michael mentioned. They will be available to you in the description. If you will be watching this on YouTube, it will be in the description there. If you are listening on the your favorite podcasting app, also you will find it in the description as well. Well, thank you very much for tuning in today. As usual, don't forget to subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube or if you are listening on your favorite podcasting platform. If it's your first time to listen to us, please don't forget to subscribe as well. And as usual, and as I mentioned, if you have any questions, any feedback about this episode or the show in general, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can send me an email, find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I would be more than happy to answer you. If you are interested to be like Michael today, a guest on the show, I would love to discuss this with you. We can also arrange for that. And as I say always, I hope that you are enjoying the content here. Thank you very much for the feedbacks I always receive from you. And until we meet in a new episode, thank you very much, and we'll meet up soon. Bye bye.